the judicial system in general and climate change, and the direct correlation between our judicial system and essentially climate change, the burning of fossil fuels. I've been involved in the judicial system now for over 10 years. I will tell you a story here, but I know this is also happening to tens and tens of thousands of people, besides just me. But back when I first got separated, and I will say I don't drink, I don't smoke, and I have no criminal record. Back when I first got separated, I was forced to go to my lawyer, who lived in Surrey, to sign paperwork. I lived in Burnaby, and then I lived in Coquitlam for a while. I had to go approximately 30 times, maybe more, back and forth to sign papers for essentially garbage documents. They never stood up, and did me much good in the long run. But it was Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court that I went to, and she would file these documents for me, and I would have to drive, copious amounts of miles, a lot of times during rush hour, sometimes an hour there, an hour back, to sign these just dumb documents. They were none of them, but they were just all designed as a cash grab. But they want you to sign documents to make it feel like you got your money's worth. So I'd, spend about $5,000 per application, and I had maybe, 15 applications to get filled out. And so then you'd have to, sign this, sign that. Oh, I forgot you got to sign this. Come and drive back here like it's, no big deal. So yeah, it is all the big, what they say now is a greenwash. There's no desire to clean up our environment regarding fossil fuels whatsoever. And the judicial system is a massive, absolutely massive contributor. And it's run by the federal government of Canada that runs our Supreme Court judicial system. Another example is I went to a judge, his name was Judge Ward K. Branch. A very important name because this is one mean, nasty, bullying, rude, condescending judge who had no desire to do what's in the best interest of my children. But 2019, I filled out all the paperwork. I did get that offline. I did what's called a notice of claim, affidavit, and got just exhibit after exhibit proving my case and why I should be allowed to take my children to to doctors and to counseling. And I proved that they needed that, and they weren't getting that from the other parent. And I would just like the ability to be able to take my children to a doctor and to counseling outside of my every second weekend access, because I was showing the judge that doctors are not open, at 6 o'clock when I pick my children up on a Friday night, and Saturdays, most of them don't practice, and pediatricians were, for the most part, were even hard to find during the week, let alone on a weekend. They were impossible. So I got all my paperwork together, and I lived at the time 4.5 hours away from the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, where in family law, the highly corrupt family law, they make you keep going to the same courthouse. Now you see a different judge every time, different white judge every time, different old man white judge every time, but you still have to keep going to the same courthouse, even though these judges do not read any of your paperwork for the most part, but you're hopeful that maybe they read a little bit of it. So 4.5 hour drive there to file my paperwork, 4.5 hour drive back home, and then so that's a lot of fuel, right? Down a main highway, up a big, the Coquihalla burns a lot of fuel. Got to go through New West. Could be rush hour when you get there. So this is one application, right? This is just one application, and I filed just like about 30 of these things with my lawyers. And then what I did, what's called self-representation, where I essentially fired my lawyers. Some of them got fired by the BC Law Society, but I self-represented. So one application, tons of fuel, greenhouse gases burning up everywhere, file the application, pay my $200 extortion fee to the Supreme Court in New Westminster. And then 3 days before your date that you stand before a judge, you have to drive all the way back and drop off what's called your black book. And this is the evidence you're going to be using in court. So into my truck I go, and I drive 4.5 hours there, 4.5, and drop my book off at the New West Courthouse. Get a, and you're hoping they don't lose your materials. And then you drive all the way home. And then, now you have a court date, which is 3 days away. 3 days later, you jump in your vehicle, you drive all the way back to the New West Courthouse, get a hotel for the night because you're going to be showing up at 9:30 a.m. to see the judge, which you may or may not get to see the judge that day, depending how busy it is. The short cases go first, short in duration time-wise, so 20-minute cases, 15-minute cases will obviously go first. Mine was an hour and a half I had scheduled because I wanted to make sure the judge really understood my application, how important it was that I'd be able to be given the legal ability to take my son to medical professionals such as pediatricians, dentists, and counseling outside of my every second weekend access. And I had a pretty insanely strong case that this should be the way it should be. And so the judge ate up the whole day. And so, you get up that morning, then now you drive to the courthouse and you park your vehicle and you go upstairs and you wait. And fortunately, I did get to see a judge, and his name was Judge Ward K. Branch. He was appointed by Justin Trudeau a few years prior. And that's how in Canada the PMO, whoever's in power, in this case it was the Liberals, appointed this very, very questionable judge. Stood in front of him. I was in major pain. My back had gone out. It was brutal. But I stood in front of him. He ridiculed me. He was rude. He was condescending. He was threatening. He was intimidating. He told a sheriff to stand beside me. And they do that for intimidation, to intimidate self-litigants, because the sheriff has a gun and stuff, but I don't care. I got friends that are police, you can wave all the guns around you want. It doesn't scare me because, I don't think Canada goes in that direction yet, where cops just outright shoot you in the face on the direction of a judge. I think we're a lot more sneaky and profit-driven in Canada. That Judge Ward Branch's main goal was to essentially just have fun and burn up the day and force me to come back to court again because he gave me nothing. He would not let me take my son to a counselor or any kind of medical professional outside of my weekend access, and he made me stand there all day taking his abuse just to tell me he wouldn't. So it was really, really, sad. But that is our court system. And at the end of it, he said, well, maybe you should come back again, right? And that's how the game works. They just want you to come back to court over and over again because they know when you get divorced, you have to divulge how much money you have for assets. And their goal is to eat up that money. The judicial system wants to eat that money up to put it back. The federal government wants to put it back in the economy. But the whole idea that the federal government cares about greenhouse gases and emissions and carbon in our environment and all that is absolute, what they call now, greenwash. It's bullshit. It's not true. They have no desire to change, their ways. So anyways, how many liters, how many tanks of gas did I burn up? So anyways, after court, I'm heartbroken. I'm just dismayed at the system, but I already knew the system was corrupt by this time. And I jump into my vehicle and drive all the way home. Major snowstorm. There's major accidents. There was a rollover in front of me. I don't think I mentioned, but when I went to court the day before, it got dark early, because it was the middle of winter. And the road was closed. So what was normally a 4.5 hour trip, I believe, on the trip to court, it took me 7 hours to get there, to drive out to New Westminster, Lower Mainland. So yeah, that's one application, and that's like maybe 4 tanks of gas for one application. And again, I've had dozens and dozens of applications in front of these judges trying to get access to my own children, trying to be able to have the right to see my children, have the right to take my children to medical professionals, etc. Another time I went to court, and there was this judge called, I think it was Mir, but there was a false accusation when I tried to take my child to a pediatrician on Fraser Street, and my ex-partner went in front of the courts and thought it was pretty funny to falsely accuse me of being an attempted child abductor of my own one child. Only one. I had 2, but I just apparently came in just to the school to steal only one of my 2 children. My weekend access was the following weekend, and so, you know, I had seen my kids 2 weeks before that, and then I saw them the week after that. So the whole charade of dragging me through the court system on a attempted child abducted charge was complete nonsense, a waste of the court's time, but they loved it. And they made just an absolute ton of money off me. And again, burned up, you know, about 3 tanks of my gas. I was living in New Westminster at the time, which was very, very fortunate. But I had to go back and forth to my lawyer. At the time I had a lawyer because I thought it was a serious charge, but it turned out these charges are kind of a joke because the police aren't involved. This is just a lawyer and a client saying that I abducted my one son, not 2, but just one. And then the judge makes a big scene about it and does a bunch of these flimsy orders and makes me come back to court again and again and again to kind of fight this trumped up charge, which everybody in the courthouse knows it's absolute garbage charge, because even the police didn't press any charges because it didn't make any sense. And then I had to run around, spend even more fuel. I had to go pick up notes from the pediatrician who signed a piece of paper saying that yes, I did have an appointment with a pediatrician, and of course now I missed it because, you know, I was denied the right to take my child to a pediatrician. And just tons and tons of fossil fuel being burnt up by the federal government's judicial system, family law system. Completely 100% profit driven, but a complete polluter of our environment. Fortunately, after I think three court dates, I got a Judge Brown, and he seized himself of my case. So occasionally you'll get a half decent judge, and they took the time to read the paperwork, and they see that there's a pattern here, that there's abuse by the other parent, and they're abusing the system, and they're making too many false claims, etc. And we don't know if Judge Brown is actually a good person. Sometimes they just do political theater in court. But he seized himself, which means he was going to be the one who would look after my case going forward, you know, and you would hope, because he would do this because he knew that it was too much abuse, you know, and too many trips to court for nothing. But unfortunately, he got transferred out to the Chilliwack courthouse. So I asked for an application to get my case transferred to the Chilliwack courthouse because he had actually seized himself of it. So one day I have to, again, I'm self-representing at this time, I have to drive out to the courthouse in Chilliwack and drop my paperwork off 3 days prior to the application. And then come court date, I drive all the way out there, and Brown had unseized himself of the case. So now I have to refile in the New West Supreme Courthouse, again, make another date, you know. They waived the $200 this time because I already paid it to one courthouse. I guess they transferred it over, and then, you know, drop my book off, go back home, and then go back to court and present my case. Again, each court trip takes a minimum 3 days of going back and forth to the courthouse. And again, for what? You know, I don't drink, I don't smoke, and I have no criminal record. Yet I've been to court approximately 75 times. And this isn't just happening to me. This is happening to tens and tens and hundreds of thousands of parents across Canada with this for-profit, designed system to basically emotionally and financially rape Canadians over and over and over again. As you know, every lawyer now knows that this is just a system designed to steal your money, and it's just gone off the rails. But that's just the emotional and financial part of it. A massive part of this is the environmental, greenhouse gas, carbon emission situation this is causing. And for me, I mean, throughout my over a decade now of working with the judicial system, just on my simple, extremely simple family law case, I don't know, over 100 tanks of gas in a truck, right? Because I have a work truck, V8, and that's what I need for hauling materials around, and that's my only vehicle. And the amount of pollution I've been contributing to the system is just absolutely massive, all because of our highly corrupt judicial system in Canada, that their only goal is money. But money comes at a cost, and it's almost better if we had sort of a system where it was outwardly corrupt, like what we term corruption. We do not actually term, in Canada we play with words, and what the judicial system in Canada is doing is actually not considered corrupt by their definition. They've changed the definition of what corruption is, and so they basically can skirt the word corruption, but it is essentially corruption. It's designed, the system is designed and engineered to extract all the money from the parents. But this comes at a massive cost to society, both in the damage it does to the children, the damage it does to parents. I no longer have any trust, faith. I don't believe in our system anymore. I'm nonviolent. I like our system because it's nonviolent, but I do think that our system causes as much damage as say what we call a corrupt system. I think we have more people falling through the cracks, more homelessness, more depression, more people doing drugs. Like, why are people doing drugs? It's because they're really depressed and sad that they would even think of doing drugs, especially when everybody knows that these drugs are killing people left, right, and center, but people still do it because they're so depressed. And the alcoholism, when I worked in the hospitals, 50% of all the people that come in the hospital, it's something to do with alcohol, whether they blew out their liver, whether they got in a car accident, whether they were drunk and fell off a ladder. It's all due to the consumption of alcohol, which, somewhat contributes to depression, but people do it because they just don't have any hope. They drink copious amounts of alcohol, right? I do see the system falling apart, and one of the ways it's going to fall apart is, the melting of our ice caps, because, they're making people like me, parents like me, drive back and forth to their kangaroo courts over and over and over again, burning up fuel to make it look like we're getting some kind of, bang for our buck, when it's just all, political theater, court theater, with no desire to ever, put an end to it, to fix things, to support parents, to support children. It's just an absolute kangaroo court. And even Judge Ward K. Branch at the end said, "Oh yeah, you'll be back." And he kind of just thought it was a big joke and laughed and walked away. And I never did go back. It's now 2022, the end of 2022. I didn't go back to court. I would not go back to family court again. I've just been too many times. It's just too financially, emotionally draining and eating up my life. I gave away a dozen years to our highly corrupt family court system, and I just can't go back anymore. And maybe Judge Ward K. Branch thought I would go back, but I can't. And all the other highly twisted judges at the New West Supreme Court thought that I'd keep going back, but there's a point where you just have to say, it's got to stop, right? And I do kind of hope now that I live long enough, and this is kind of depressing, but again, I don't smoke, I don't drink, and I have no criminal record, but I am extremely interested to see the end come. For me, they took my children away from me. I do now think that we deserve everything we get. I spoke recently to a Crown Counsel, so that's the lawyer for Vancouver that represents the state, and it was out of Vancouver, and I spoke to her, and we were chatting about the judicial system, and I said, every time I see a homeless person on the street, and people doing drugs and drug paraphernalia and needles lying on the street. I don't see it anymore because I don't live anywhere near that cesspool called Vancouver. But it's coming out to the interior also where I live, right? It's all over Kamloops and Kelowna and, Merritt and all kinds of places I'm seeing online that it's, people are tripping over, junkies and needles and, watching people literally, die on the streets and freeze to death and fingers falling off. Talk to nurses and they'll tell you, all the horrible, horrible things they see day in and day out. But I said, you deserve it. I told Crown Counsel out of Vancouver that you absolutely deserve it. And I root and I hope that in my lifetime that it will come back and get so bad that it'll bite these lawyers and these judges and the federal government on the ass. Because I don't think it's stoppable now. I think it's gotten so out of hand. There's so much corruption in the system, whether it be the fake regulatory boards such as the Canadian Judicial Council or the Law Society of British Columbia or all the other fake organizations that profit off this system. And their whole idea is to insulate each other, that they'll all suffer in that homelessness and drug addiction and all the debauchery we see on the street will get so bad that it'll encroach into, their little palaces they live in. And I think, right now, and for me too, I worked down Vancouver for, I did a 15-year stint in downtown Vancouver. And I used to drive by all the homeless people on Hastings Street and, was it Pender or whatever, and see it. But I lived out in the suburbs. So, in my neighborhood, it was safe. I could leave my lawnmower out and nobody stole it, right? But from what I hear now, where I lived in the suburbs now, you can't leave your lawnmower sitting out in your front yard for more than 10 minutes because someone will just come and steal it. And I think for a long time, these judges and these lawyers and these MPs and the federal government and the policymakers that create the laws and the acts, they lived far enough away from the homelessness and the debauchery and the drugs and the drug dealers and the dark side of town. But what's happening now is that's getting worse and worse and worse, and it's encroaching on those people who didn't have to see it. And like me, I drove down Vancouver, I made my money, and then I drove out of the core and I went to my safe little haven in the suburbs. But now the suburbs are not that good anymore around Vancouver. So I truly hope, and I told the girl from Crown Counsel, she's Crown Counsel, that I truly hope in my lifetime that it gets you. It totally gets you. That you will suffer for all your not caring. Now, obviously, Crown Counsel doesn't make the rules. It comes from the federal government. But we did chat about how she takes direction from federal policy and federal acts. And she was kind enough to go in and bring up the act and what section of the act that she was following. But we have but she's also doesn't really care because she's making her $200,000 a year just going through the motions without any emotion, but just going through the motions of running people through the system And it's heartbreaking that nobody really cares because it doesn't affect them yet. But I said I really, really hope that those homeless people and, the drug addicts, and you find needles on your front lawn because you're a major contributor to this. And I totally believe it's true. I'm not the only one that knows our judicial system is broken. And I'm not the only one that's been through this system and had literally hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen off them by the judicial system in Canada and been just absolutely brutalized by this system as I burn up tons and tons of fossil fuel, when I still had hope that going to court would make a difference and be able to, be a part of my children's lives. So, so I digress, but I just wanted to chat a little bit about climate change, and what this term I just heard on the radio called Greenwash, and that's essentially organizations claiming to be going green and selling the idea like the federal government does, putting out ads that they care about climate targets and such, yet they, really don't. They don't give a rat's ass. It's all about money, it's all about rhetoric, and it's all about, propaganda. And there is no desire to clean up our system. And our system will, and mark my words, it will implode. I'm, again, 100% nonviolent. I kind of hope that I get at least another 10 years, but in a lot of ways I hope that Canada does pay for what it's done to its own people. and what is done, the policymakers in the back room, but also, the people just following along and letting this happen and profiting off it. All the lawyers and all the judges who just think this is all a big joke and they can buy a house just a little bit farther from the rough part of town, right? And keep away from it and not care that there's people, and it's not me anymore, but have to live near, all this, oppression and depression and homelessness and drug addicts and petty thieves and poverty and, all the zombieism that, a lot of people are like just majorly brain dead from doing drugs, and there can no longer be a productive part of society. And then, the poor nurses and the doctors and, the people that have to, ambulance drivers that have to spend their whole life babysitting these people that fell through the cracks, and nobody gives a rat's ass. They don't. And, people hear this, well, fix the system, or, climate change is going to happen faster. And absolutely, I think we're at the point where nobody can fix our system anymore. I think the system has gotten so bad that it's impossible to fix. And I think in my lifetime, if I live, say, another 2 decades, I think we're going to see this getting really, really bad, where nobody is going to be able to buy a house far enough away from all the, sort of the debauchery and the social cancer that is creeping up. And even if you can, I think we're going to spend more summers in a haze of smoke with, these massive heat waves. I think it's everyone's going to pay for being, willfully blind to a broken system and for profiting off a broken system. And and I say good. I hope, I hope the Judge Ward K. branches of the Supreme Court system who are in the position of power to make change, I really do hope that they choke on, the wildfire smoke. And I hope they, find a needle on their front lawn, or one sitting on top of their car when they come out, to their fancy car. And when they go to the New West courthouse, they're tripping over, hypodermic needles and, and disease and despair, and they have to look at the tents. I hope it catches up to them. I really do, because they completely 100% deserve it.